It seemed like just another quiet town. Snowtown, a place where neighbors knew each other, where time moved slowly and crime was virtually unheard of. But beneath this tranquil facade lay one of the most horrifying stories in Australian history, a tale of torture, manipulation, and death that would forever haunt the nation. This is the story of John Bunting and the infamous bodies in barrels. John Bunting wasn't just the mastermind. He was the kind of man who could pull you into his orbit with a smile, a laugh, and a false sense of safety. But behind his charm lurked a sadistic predator. He believed he was on a righteous mission, a self-proclaimed crusader purging the world of what he called deviants. His victims weren't random. They were people he manipulated, people society often forgot about. They were the weak, the marginalized, and sometimes even those closest to him. But make no mistake, once you crossed John Bunting's path, there was no escape. The crimes began in the early 1990s in South Australia, but it wasn't until much later that the true horror was uncovered. Bunting, along with his accomplices Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis, lured their victims in, often using deception and manipulation. Their methods of murder were nothing short of sadistic. Victims were tortured for hours, sometimes days. The killers extracted confessions or bank account information before finally ending their lives. The bodies were then stuffed into industrial barrels filled with acid, a gruesome attempt to dissolve the remains and eliminate evidence. The torture these victims endured was unimaginable. For some, it began with psychological torment, taunts, mockery, and threats that instilled a sense of hopelessness. Then came the physical torture, which often involved pliers, blowtorches, and makeshift tools designed to inflict maximum pain. Victims were beaten relentlessly, sometimes burned, and in some cases their fingernails were ripped out one by one. One victim, Elizabeth Hayden, was strangled and beaten, her body later mutilated to ensure it fit inside a barrel. Her death was orchestrated by Bunting with the cold efficiency of a man who felt no remorse, no empathy. One of the most horrifying accounts came from James Vlasakis himself. He recounted the murder of his half-brother, Troy Eude. Troy was beaten mercilessly, his body bruised and bloodied, before Bunting forced him to read degrading statements into a recording device. The recordings were later used to impersonate Troy and claim his welfare payments. As Vlasakis described his stepbrother's final moments, choking, crying, and begging for mercy, it was clear that Bunting enjoyed watching life slip away from his victims. For years, these barrels were moved from one location to another, hidden in garages and backyards. But it was in Snowtown, in an abandoned bank, that they found their final resting place. When the police arrived in 1999, tipped off by an anonymous source, they couldn't have prepared for what they found. In the vault of that decrepit building were 6 barrels containing the remains of 8 victims. The stench was overwhelming, the sight unforgettable. It wasn't just a crime scene, it was a monument to human depravity. But the horror didn't end with the barrels. The investigation revealed layers of manipulation and betrayal. Bunting didn't just kill strangers. He coerced his victims' friends and family members to turn against them, convincing them to participate in the murders. James Vlasakis, the youngest accomplice, had grown up idolizing Bunting, seeing him as a father figure. That blind loyalty led him to assist in the torture and killing of people he knew, including his own half-brother and stepbrother. One of the most chilling aspects of the Snowtown murders was the cold, calculated way the killers exploited their victims even after death. They drained their bank accounts, collected welfare payments, and continued to use their identities to avoid detection. It wasn't just murder, it was a complete erasure of their existence, as if they had never mattered at all. The trial that followed was one of the longest and most expensive in Australian history. The evidence presented was stomach-turning: recordings of the victims' screams, detailed accounts of the torture, and the horrifying realization that these murders weren't just random acts of violence, they were part of a systematic, methodical plan. John Bunting was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as were Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis. But for the families of the victims, no sentence could ever bring back the lives stolen by these monsters. The town of Snowtown has struggled to shake its association with these heinous crimes. For many, the name itself is synonymous with horror. The bank where the barrels were found still stands, a silent reminder of the darkness that once lurked in the heart of this small community. And yet, the story of the Snowtown murders is not just one of evil. It's a cautionary tale about the power of manipulation, the dangers of blind loyalty, and the devastating consequences of letting monsters walk among us. Today, the question remains, how could something so horrifying happen in a place so seemingly peaceful? It's a question that may never be fully answered, but the legacy of John Bunting and his accomplices will never be forgotten. Their crimes are etched into the fabric of Australian history, a chilling reminder of just how far human cruelty can go when left unchecked.